Welcome, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Dottino Manukian. I am an Associate Director of Corporate and Foundation Relations at the Nature Conservancy. Thank you all for joining the Nature Conservancy's webinar, the Business of Nature Corporate Learning Series on Water. We have our guests here, Fawn Bergen, Corporate Sustainability Manager from Intel, Christina Bosch-Ladd, Director of Sustainability at Keurig Dr. Pepper, and Byron Thayer, Senior Manager of Sustainability Reporting and Water Strategy at Levi Strauss. We are very excited to dive deep with these corporate sustainability leaders to learn a little bit more about their journey toward water sustainability and stewardship. So with that, I will pass this off to our moderator and TNC's Senior Corporate Water Advisor, Nabia Afosu-Ama.
Great, thank you so much, Elizabeth, and thank you all for joining today on a Friday afternoon for many of us. Excited to dive into this conversation on water with some of TNC's great partner organizations. So I'm going to start by just giving a quick introduction to myself, and then we'll pass it over to our panelists to introduce themselves. As Elizabeth mentioned, I'm a senior corporate engagement advisor focused on water security here at the Nature Conservancy, and I'm based out of our headquarters, which is in Arlington, Virginia, in the DC area. I've been here at TNC for about 4 years now, focusing on our strategy to engage companies in water. And before that, I worked for another nonprofit for about 7 years, coordinating public-private partnerships in the water space, including a lot of work on Coca-Cola's replenishment program. I also have an academic background in environmental science, policy, and geography. So really excited to talk about this opportunity and this work. Here at the Conservancy, we focus on various strategies. We have some internal principles and protocols for engaging companies on water issues globally. And I also serve as our relationship manager for some of our engagements with companies in the water space, as well as our engagements in different industry coalitions like the CEO Water Mandate, the Alliance for Water Stewardship, and Science-Based Targets, which TNC is engaging in, and I know a number of our companies participating here are engaged in as well. So today we're kind of experiencing unprecedented times with the COVID pandemic and lots of issues going on, as well as that water crisis that we've seen ongoing for the past many decades. And so we really appreciate your interest in joining TNC in our discussion with this panel of corporate sustainability leaders. We're really excited to present our discussion today on how our panelists and their companies are tackling water sustainability. So as Elizabeth mentioned, we are recording this event. So just adjust your settings if you prefer not to be on video during that recording. And then after the panel discussion, which we'll kick off just now, we will also have a Q&A with all of the panelists. So please type any questions that you have into the chat at any point during the conversation, and we will compile those and try to answer as many as we can as we move through this. And if we're unable to answer your question, we'll try to email you back with an answer, and really thank you for your participation today. So we will kick it over to our panelists to introduce themselves in alphabetical order. So we will start with Byron.
Great, thank you. So I'm Byron Thayer. So I'm a senior manager. I oversee sustainability reporting and our water strategy at Levi Strauss & Company. I've been with the company 7 years or so. My favorite body of water is actually the Rio Grande because I grew up near it. And I was swimming and canoeing all throughout my childhood there.
Great, thank you, Byron, and thanks for remembering our special question, which is the favorite body of water for our panelists. So I'll hand it over to Fawn now.
Hi, everyone. My name is Fawn Bergen, and I am excited to be here today representing Intel Corporation. I lead our global sustainability team, which includes our commitments in climate, energy, water, waste, and circular economy. I live in Portland, Oregon, out of Intel's largest site when not working at home like the rest of us now. I'm a native Oregonian, so my favorite body of water is the Willamette River, and it's pronounced Willamette. A lot of people pronounce it Willamette and Oregon. It's Oregon and Willamette River. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Fawn. And Tina.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Glad to be here. I'm Tina Bosch-Ladd with Keurig Dr. Pepper. I've been with the company coming up on 7 years and in the corporate sustainability space about 10. My role as a director on our corporate sustainability team encompasses our climate and water strategies, as well as waste diversion. Based out of Boston, and I'm lucky to get up to the coast in Maine every summer, where my favorite body of water is the Penobscot Bay.
Great. We have a good geographic representation of favorite bodies of water as well. Wonderful. So we're going to just dive right into some questions for our panelists here. And the first question that we have is really just to provide everyone here a little bit more on the why. So why did your company decide to focus on water sustainability? And I'll start with Fawn.
Water is absolutely critical to our business. We're semiconductor manufacturing, and it's, for me, when I was learning about semiconductor manufacturing before joining Intel, I also had no idea how critical water is to semiconductor manufacturing. We absolutely cannot make our products without it. We need large volumes of high quality water. We use what's called ultra pure water, which is essentially the purest H2O that exists on the planet. And we use water to the tune of about 13 billion gallons per year. We're also a global company, so we have operations in water sensitive regions around the world. In the US, places like Arizona and California, and internationally in places like Israel and China. We focus greatly. We put a lot of resources and investment to being a positive part of our communities, and water challenges affect the whole community. Well, based on that, water is essential for Intel's long-term success, and therefore we view it as we really must invest in our resources. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Fawn. Byron, I'm going to pass it over to you, but do you have any reaction to kind of how Fawn set that up? You're on mute, Byron.
Sorry. And the amazing thing is that the very first thing I was going to say was the exact same thing that Fawn said, which is that water is critical to our business as well. And it's something that I also agree that when I started this job, I kind of knew it was important. I don't know if I fully appreciated how important it is. But the reality is that apparel production requires a lot of water at every step of the process, from starting with growing cotton to manufacturing, all the way through to consumer care and home laundry. But like a lot of companies, we tend to focus a lot of attention on what's in our direct control. And so for us, that is where we use our innovative waterless techniques and water recycling programs. But we also try to influence where we don't have direct control, such as addressing the water use of cotton and the health of watersheds. But I would say though, like we've had that for a long time, but the biggest shift for us thinking about water happened in 2019, before the world ended, I guess. And that's when we created our 2025 Water Action Strategy. And behind that was a simple realization, which was that saving a liter of water in an area where water is scarce or mismanaged is more impactful than saving that same liter of water in an area that has lots of water or is well managed. And therefore, a one-size-fits-all approach to all geographies and all sites, it doesn't really make sense for us. And so we've chosen to really address water in a local context and prioritize our efforts accordingly.
That's great. Yeah, water is local, as we heard from some of your favorite bodies of water that you suggested earlier. So Tina, over to you on this question of why your company is engaging in this area.
Yeah, and I think the themes will start to pull through here because it's similar for us in that water is critical to producing our product, and it's also part of our final product as a beverage company. So we feel, incredibly responsible, therefore, not only to sustain our business over time, but to do so in a responsible way and in partnership with communities where we operate to support the long-term health of the water resource. And I think we came to that, a bit over time through a couple of different threads. We began some of our water work with the water footprint analysis, which corroborated, of course, the importance of water in the product, but also in our supply chain. Similar to what Byron described in terms of water for cotton, we've got water for coffee growing and for other agricultural inputs. We have a strong legacy in our coffee supply chain of supporting projects that improve access to water, that improve quality of water, water smart practices, that sort of thing. And now as Keurig Dr Pepper, which really just came together as a company a couple of years ago, we've got a much broader portfolio. And just in a minute, I'll just touch on that so it's familiar to folks. But we're now looking at, what's the appropriate way to extend some of what we learned in coffee into other areas of our supply chain. We've also taken a risk prioritized approach for working on water related to our own operations, and then partnered with the Nature Conservancy and others to really work on those projects. Just for a second, just some of the brands that might be familiar to folks who this sort of mashup sounding company of Keurig Dr Pepper is, we came together about 2.5 years ago, and hot beverages from Keurig Green Mountain, coffee in particular, and cold beverages from Dr Pepper Snapple Group, where brands include Dr Pepper, Canada Dry, 7-Up, A&W Root Beer, Mott's Apple Juice, and a whole host of others, just to give a little bit of an idea of the range and, again, the importance of water to that portfolio.
That's great. Thanks, Tina. So, I'm struck by, we have 3 very different companies here, but the stories all sound a little bit similar. So starting to see some of those threads of the importance of water and how you can kind of at a gut reaction level care about the importance of water. But we're going to get a little bit deeper into how you make the case for that and what it looks like from a corporate perspective. So that's the why. A little bit on the how. What are your corporate water goals, and do you have specific targets you set for water efforts? So Byron, I'm going to start on that question with you.
Sure. Yes, we do. So we have geographically contextual water targets for suppliers. And the way we do that is we use the best available water stress data from WRI Aqueduct, probably like a lot of companies. And we've categorized all of our key vendor suppliers and from tier 1 and tier 2 into kind of 3 buckets. So there's the based on geography. So there's the suppliers that are in low and medium and high water stress areas. And for suppliers that are in the low and medium stress geographies, they get a progressive efficiency target over time. But suppliers that are in the high water stress area, they get a much more aggressive target. That's an absolute target. So even if their business grows over time, their water consumption has to go down simultaneously. And the headline target for us is that we've committed to reduce our manufacturing water use by 50% in high water stress areas by 2025. And this really helps us kind of clarify our vision that we need to focus on water recycling in many cases and water efficiency where it's needed the most. And at the same time, we're also in the midst of defining a new set of goals around cotton. I always love being on panels with people who are from the food and beverage industry, like Tina, because if you kind of go back far enough into the supply chain, we both have an agricultural component at the root, and so we always have kind of that lens on as well. And so whatever our new goals around cotton and alternative fibers are, water reduction will absolutely be a key priority. And one early indication of this is we're really starting to scale the use of hemp in our jeans as a cotton alternative.
Very interesting. I would love to talk more about that. We can connect offline.
Sure.
Tina, this question of what are your corporate water goals and specific targets that you may have for these efforts?
Yeah, absolutely. So while I would say, even though I spoke to the supply chain component of our water strategy and it being a critical piece there, in terms of targets, that's still work in progress. Where we have existing goals is for our operations, where we are seeking to become 20% more efficient by 2025. And the key metric we use in the beverage industry is the water use ratio. So we look at how much water is coming into your operations versus how much goes out in the product. And that's, it allows for a little bit of comparison across the industry. It also gives just kind of a clear picture of the fact that it takes more water than just what ends up in the bottle to actually make a container of beverage. The other goal we have is related to our high-risk manufacturing sites. Not surprisingly, those are in regions southwestern US, Texas, and Mexico. We prioritize those using the same tools Byron mentioned. We're in the process of updating that assessment and taking on board the results from that. We're a North American company, so those locations are certainly going to stay part of the mix as we update with new and more info. And our water stewardship goal is then for those sites to replenish 100% of the water that they use, and to do so in the kind of watersheds that we're pulling from, or connected as closely as possible.
Great, thank you for that. And Fawn, just hearing a little bit more about your goals and targets as well.
Right. Last year, we announced our 2030 RISE strategy, RISE standing for our commitment to be responsible, inclusive, sustainable company that enables technology solutions. And under the S pillar, the sustainability pillar, we've committed to achieve net positive water by 2030. And what that means to us, what that terminology means, is that Intel will be returning and restoring more fresh water than we use. To get there, we have two specific goals. The first is reduce our freshwater use within our operations and through partnerships by conserving 60 billion gallons of water by 2030. The second part of that is restoring more fresh water than we use to our watersheds, than we consume, excuse me. We are doing that by funding projects in our watersheds, supporting partners like the Nature Conservancy that are focused on solving water challenges specific to that watershed and specific to the amounts that we consume in that watershed. So very, very local, context-based. And these are a broad range of projects, not just conservation, I think is what people will often think about, but it's projects that protect, return, treat, or conserve water resources. We still have our work cut out for us, but I'm really excited the progress that we have made in even a few years on our water strategy.
Great, thanks, Fawn. And I just want to ask a follow-up question here. You all talked about, prioritizing and the local nature of water issues and looking at kind of context-based solutions. How did you deal with those issues in setting kind of corporate water goals and looking at those kind of that local nature of water? Anyone can reply.
I'm happy to respond and let some of the fellow panelists, if they are. We really approached it, I think that there's different approaches to this type of, whether you call it replenishment or restoration or return, which is kind of the messaging, right? But we really did, when we committed to this, and part of it is because our footprint is very different than, say, you mentioned Coca-Cola, which was, they were extremely helpful to us when we were setting our strategy. Their footprint is very different than Intel in that they just, maybe medium-sized facilities in so many places. Our footprint is the large majority of our freshwater use is at our manufacturing sites. And those are really kind of a handful of sites around the world. We have other hundreds of locations that are more office buildings and maybe have cooling towers, but not manufacturing. So I would say it sort of allowed us to set that as part of our strategy. And that we were very, and sometimes it can be limiting to us when we're selecting projects, but we're focused on investing on the projects that have some hydrologic connection to Intel. Whether it's, some of the projects can be that benefit the community. It may be a not direct, upstream supply to Intel. An example is a project in Oregon is out on the Deschutes River. Really important for our community and employees, but not a direct connection to Intel's water supply. So that was part of when we were setting our strategy from the beginning. And we have really stuck to that, where we are investing in water restoration projects in, say, Arizona, where we're using the water, not, Alabama, where maybe we're not.
That's great. Thanks for clarifying on that. I don't know, Byron or Tina, if you want to add anything on that point.
Yeah, sure. I think, with regard to sort of the corporate goal versus the local nature of water, I think we just had to, right from the beginning, get everybody comfortable with, the idea that water is local and water issues are relatively local. And so part of our goal was also saying what our approach was going to be. And our approach was to, use risk tools, but then to also, for those sites within our manufacturing footprint and where we were setting a quantitative target, to look at what the context was. So we developed a water stewardship plan for each of those 6 priority sites that we have, and took into account who the other water users are, who the other stakeholders are, what ongoing initiatives there may already be that we could help amplify, or what the shared water challenges were, so that we could try to make a really meaningful investment with one of these projects, exactly to Fawn's point of trying to make the connection to our own usage and also to what the actual local conditions are. So a great example with the Nature Conservancy this past year was in Texas, where maybe we'll talk about project specifics later, Navia, but it sort of built from this idea of taking that contextual look and trying to find the local opportunities. So even though the corporate goal is up at the top level, the approach right from the beginning had to roll in that that more tailored focus geographically.
I don't have a whole lot more to add. I think they covered it. The only small tidbit I would say is that, one of the harder kind of speed bumps, let's say, to getting the contextual approach kind of bought in was at a certain level about the metrics, because everybody loves a good, huge number, like number of liters saved or whatever. And, we can still track that, but we really had to train leaders to think like whenever I tell you a number of liters, your next question should be where was that saved? And so really trying to train people to think about, well, this water saved where it's needed is actually kind of more impactful and more useful as a metric to the business also than, the biggest number possible that you can generate.
Great, thanks for that, Byron. Okay, we're going to move to the next question here, which is around the business case for this. So how is your team making the business case for water, and what does your company prioritize when considering water investments? Tina, did you want to start on that?
Sure, yeah, I think I was ready to jump here. So in terms of making the business case for water, I think some of the pieces we've already talked about really kind of bolster that. So just in terms of understanding the importance of water to the business, recognizing that dependency, but then also recognizing pressures on water resources, right? And that to be positioned for long-term success as a business, you've got to be able to support the underlying resources that you're dependent on. And those pressures are, growing populations in some locations. It's impacts that are coming in a variety of ways with climate change. Those have different geographies as well, but so we sort of acknowledge and study those risks to the business, but then also we make the case by presenting kind of the benefits to the company of having a positive impact on this resource for the long term, engaging with the community so that we're part of whatever the efforts are ongoing to protect the resource. And then in terms of prioritizing projects, we start with those water stewardship plans that I mentioned to try to identify where the most meaningful place for us to get involved is, recognizing that, we've got a lot going on in water, but we're not the experts. And there are other stakeholders to learn from, partners like TNC to work with and to work through. So we prioritize projects that address the shared water challenge first and foremost in the watersheds that we're focused on. And because of our quantitative goal, we also prioritize projects that have that quantifiable water volume benefit, and that can be achieved through a number of different types of projects. Fawn described some perfectly, so I won't repeat. And then we also look at projects that have co-benefits. So there might be additional benefits to the environment. It might be water access. It might be some other kind of positive benefit to water supply for drinking water, something like that. finally, we seek to have well-regarded partners kind of in this work with us. Again, we can support a lot and we can do a lot, but we're one player and there are water experts out there to kind of lead the way and really do excellent implementation and help bring scale. And finally, that's the last piece we look for is, is this a project that either we're supporting so that it can go on and become bigger by this being a demonstration or a first step at it, or is this a project that we could help bring in more funders to and create a collective action opportunity. So trying to seek opportunities to have more impact than we could alone as KDP.
That's great. That collective action is really
list.
needed. Yeah, lots of priorities, definitely. Byron, do you want to come in here on how are you prioritizing investments and making the business case for water?
Yeah. Regarding the business case, I mean, on one level, it's actually quite simple, which is, if there's no water, there's no genes. Without water, you can't make anything in our business. But, kind of more deeper than that, like Tina, we definitely prefer water projects that have co-benefits. And that's just because water is so interconnected with our other sustainability goals and our business needs. So like some quick examples are like, when factories save water, they also often save energy, which reduces carbon emissions, and it saves money for the factories as well. When our suppliers implement a large quantity of water recycling, that can help reduce the risk to that factory because they have resilience in case of a drought. Or clean water access to apparel workers can both help the community and it can help the bottom line of the factory as well. And then these are all kind of in the fence line view, let's say, but, looking outside the fence line, like we all want to do, and considering the health of the watersheds and the health of the local communities, that's helpful from a business case perspective also, because it allows us to secure not just the social license to operate in that area, but it arguably gives us a social license to grow because we have buy-in from the local community. And that's very important to us. And that kind of further justifies the very specific geographic approach that we've had for prioritizing our efforts. And I'll give a quick plug to the Nature Conservancy. That the Water Fund project outside of Cape Town is a really fine example of that. And we're a very proud partner.
Great, thanks, Byron, for that. That project is very unique, the one in Cape Town, so I encourage people to take a look at that one as well. Fawn, over to you on the business case and how you prioritize investments.
I think it's similar to what Byron, his opening. Since water is absolutely critical to our business, in some ways, the case of water investment has already been made. But obviously, we still have our work cut out for us. Internally, one thing that we've been working towards, and I think made great strides, to strengthen that business case and to continue to drive more investment and innovation, we look at water risks, already mentioned, not surprisingly. We use the Aqueduct Risk Atlas as well. We look primarily with water stress. But one thing that we've been working on internally is to quantify the total, we call it the total cost of ownership, also known as true cost of water, or a different similar terminology is out there. But this is developing how much does it actually cost Intel for every gallon of water that we bring in, treat, we use in our process, treat again, and either reuse on site or discharge back to our community. How much does that actually cost Intel? And for those of you, I'm sure, have looked at this or even thought about it, it's not even close to what we're paying your utility rates. So this not only helps us understand our own water footprint, helps us understand our risks, but putting a dollar amount on how much it actually costs us is a really highly impactful case internally for investing in water conservation and stewardship. And it really is driving meaningful change internally. Outside the company, for our water restoration projects, I think similar to what we just heard with the other panelists, we are looking, as I mentioned, we're looking for those local impacts some hydrologic connection. So we're very focused on the local element. We look for partners. You know, we have funded quite a number of TNC projects, particularly in Arizona and California, because they have a track record of knowing how to actually achieve success in these projects. So we spend time up front before we will fund a project with any partner to make sure that they fit that bill. And, you know, like TNC, since we funded so many, we just continue to see success in those projects. One thing we also look at for most of our projects, we look at the projects that are going to have 10 or more year benefit. You know, we have funded year-to-year projects when there is a really strong need, like on the Rio Grande and on the Colorado River last year. But we are looking really at investing those dollars in long-term impacts. So that is something that is very high on my list as well. And just like was already mentioned, you know, we obviously look for those projects that maybe catalyze more work. There's a pilot we're working on funding now that we know could be, you know, an amazing, huge project if the pilot is successful. So anything that we can do, even if it is going out there and talking about these projects, bringing more attention, we really try to use our voice as well to bring more to that. So I think a lot of these things that the other panelists talk about sounds like we're all looking at the same types of things, right? Where our dollars are going to have the most impact.
Yeah, I think there's definitely the similarities continue in terms of how you all are thinking about prioritization as well. And it sounds like, you know, all of your companies have had some good success engaging in different projects on the ground, starting to see that impact on your water risk. Can we also talk about the other sides, so some of the challenges or barriers that you faced when advancing these goals? And Fawn, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, I'm actually going to share two with you. The first is on us. It's our water use. Our water use is driven both by the growth of our company, you know, our output, which thankfully has been on an upward trend for years, but it's also connected to technology development. Every 2.5 years, a new technology comes out, a new technology that hasn't existed before. And with each new technology, it is more complex. And every new technology, that complexity requires more resources like water and energy. So it's this incredible challenge for us to really get ahead of that and to reduce our overall water use. The second that I think probably a lot of people feel this way, and this is very much the external type projects, but the access to partners and projects. It's a huge challenge. There is no global marketplace where you can go and just find projects or partners easily. There's some groups I think that are trying to do this on a smaller scale, but it can take, I'm sure many of you have been in this or maybe in it now, but it can take years sometimes to lay that groundwork, to find the right partners, to even where do you start? I mean, that is intimidating. But then, you know, finding the right projects that maybe in the locations you're looking or the size that you're looking for, you know, maybe it's a timeline you're looking for. It's intimidating. It's not easy to get there. You know, if you compare it to going and buying carbon offsets or RECs, you can just go online and find credible sources with certifications, and that doesn't necessarily exist at a large scale. And so, you know, I remember when we started to develop our strategy, we were the first tech company to make this type of global commitment. And many of our NGO partners that we either funded or were evaluating a project, they told me they would have had no idea a tech company was ever looking at these types of projects. So they wouldn't have approached us for funding. So I think it's slowing down the progress. The more that all of us can connect the funding need and opportunities to the companies that are looking to make an impact, we're just going to create more momentum and a lot more success. But right now, it is very challenging to get there.
That's very understandable. In terms of finding the right projects in the right places with the right partners, it can be a challenge, definitely. Tina, thoughts on challenges and barriers?
Yeah, I would echo some of the same. And then one that I would add is just a bit of kind of evolving expectations for companies. And these pressures can come from like the investor community on the level of disclosure you're able to provide, or the level of detail about your 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 plans and your integration with your business strategy, that kind of thing. That's one set of expectations. Another is simply like evolving information, so that WRI water aqueduct or aqueduct tool that we've each mentioned, super useful. It was updated in the last couple of years. And so there's new and better information, which is fantastic. But it also means that as we update our risk assessment, we just got our goals published a year and a half ago. And now we're looking at, is this going to actually come up with different results? And so, the sort of goalposts can feel like they keep shifting. I think similarly, again, really good progress in terms of like thought leadership and direction on where companies ought to be going. But there's been, the replenish type targets, the context-based targets. Now there's Water Positive and the Water Resilience Coalition and other initiatives that are working appropriately to kind of move things forward. But one additional challenge is just sort of figuring out like, okay, where do I fit in here, and what can I actually get going on and keep working on while this evolution is still happening, and while still trying to be doing the right thing in a meaningful way as it progresses.
Yeah, lots of frameworks out there, and hard to navigate which ones to engage in and how. Byron, other challenges and barriers?
Yeah, I got a couple for sure. So one is actually kind of related to your last question about, the business case, and specifically about quantification of the risk. And like Fawn rightly pointed out, that focusing on the price of water is a dead end, like, because the price of water never matches the value. And sometimes people intuitively think that because they think of electricity or utility costs being similar. And so I always say it's much more useful, instead of kind of focusing on that, to kind of paint a scenario that's similar to the day zero catastrophe that came very close to happening in Cape Town, where we happen to have a factory. And the loss of production capability is far more risky and pricey than the cost of water ever will be. And so that's one thing I try to do. Second, a challenge is that, we do consider ourselves a leader in sustainability within our sector, but we do sometimes have to convince our internal colleagues that we actually have a lot more to do. And our colleagues know that we've done a lot. We have, for example, over 3/4 of all the products we make are made with waterless techniques. But that's not enough. We got to go bigger than that. And that's where we get to the contextual approach that we've all talked about, that is at one level very intuitive, and that's the beauty of it, is its simplicity. It's easy for leaders to understand that water is more important in a dry area than in a wet area. I'd say the other challenge, though, is definitely on the raw materials side, if I'm being honest. And the key for us is we got to make better and faster progress on addressing the water use in cotton production in particular. We do that through a variety of partnerships, and we're exploring alternative fiber options like hemp, like I mentioned, but also new business models. So we have like a whole fleet of tailor shops kind of nestled within some of our stores, and where consumers can go in and they can get their jeans repaired. And that kind of extends the lifespan of that garment for quite a bit longer. We also have a re-commerce site where we sell secondhand jeans, and bundle those together. Those are ways to reduce our use of new version resources over time. But it's kind of an all of the above approach is probably necessary.
Yeah, definitely. There are lots of things that we can work on, innovate around to try and solve some of these issues, and that's a really big challenge to get there. So as we close out this panel, I just have one final question, which is what advice you all would give a company who's interested in exploring or expanding their water investments. And if you have, your most important or your one key piece of advice that you want to share before we move to Q&A, that would be great. And I'm going to start with Tina, on this.
All right, if I pick just one, it might be obvious from some of the foregoing discussion, but I think it is to find good partners. And I think the Nature Conservancy for us has been that kind of key partner that we've worked with many others, both in the NGO space and then also in kind of the consultancy. I think both are important. The consultant can help you with some of that, number crunching, risk analysis, and building the business case and those sorts of pieces of things. If presumably you don't have a water team in-house, like most of us don't. You got a person maybe, or half a person. And then, there are a lot of resources out there. They're hard to pull together. They're hard to find. There aren't turnkey projects necessarily everywhere, but the partners are the kind of key avenue to finding the ones that exist or to developing them where they don't exist together. So I think it's really spending the time to develop those relationships and to find good partners.
Great, thanks for that. And Byron, your thought on one key piece of advice?
I would say that you should expect to have different playbooks based on kind of what altitude that you operate in. And so, what I mean by that is like, for kind of like the bottom level, so kind of like site level or supplier level, don't underestimate the power of a good factory level target. As simple as that seems, it can do wonders for you. And then you kind of click up one level to like a local or a regional level, and you need something totally different. Like you are going to need diplomacy to find partners to address the water issues that you yourself as one company are never going to be able to solve alone. But the prize is that it will ultimately give you that license to grow, like I talked about. And then kind of finally, kind of like maybe one level higher, like an enterprise level, let's say, that whenever you're celebrating success internally, always try to give your colleagues in other departments the spotlight and kind of slink away from the spotlight yourself if possible, because they will be more likely to work with you in the future, obviously. So those are my tips.
Yeah, I like that last one. It's a good tip. Fawn, over to you.
I say look to the experts. Externally, for us, that means environmental groups like the Nature Conservancy. The external projects that we're funding, they're not Intel developed projects. We'll make our chips. TNC they're the environmental experts. So the way that we approach it, and probably all the other companies in this group are the same way, but Intel does not, we don't dictate what the projects are. TNC is the one, and why we fund groups like TNC and similar NGOs. They know that area. They've been years building trust, understanding what's needed in the watershed. And so we enable them to do it, and we give them the money and we get out of their way. We stay in touch on the project. And so to me, they are the watershed experts. That's not what we are. The second piece of that is their internal experts. We've had a lot of success in this area. The people that know your systems, the people that know the best way to use water efficiently or innovations in conservation, they're the people that run those systems and operations. For us, those are our engineering teams that work in our ultra pure water treatment plants or manage our cooling towers. They often have these wonderful ideas, but their job maybe is not necessarily carved out specific to conservation. And so putting together a framework, we've done this across all of our sustainability functions, having energy and water champions. So it's almost an official role. They can carve out part of it and they get to actually do it. And we help support that with technical expertise, funding for projects. And then I think the really, really important, and Byron kind of touched on it, is the rewarding, to be able to create this cycle of, enthusiasm and passion with our employees. Not only do you empower them, but you reward them. So we have internal reward programs where, there's monetary recognition, visible recognition, which to some people is even more important than monetary. But then you continue to build that passion and you get more people interested, and it just sort of builds on itself. And we honestly have had so much success from those types of structures.
Great, some really interesting ideas, I think, for companies to consider on how to get these ideas out there, get people enthusiastic about them as well. So we're now moving to Q&A. I know we have a number of people on the line, so please type any questions that you have into the chat. And if we don't have a lot, I have more questions that I can ask to our panelists. Maybe while we're waiting for people to type questions in, well, I see one that's coming here, so I'll go ahead with this one and then I'll move to my next. So question here to expand on details on a few of the projects and how you've been able to partner. So, we heard some tidbits here and there from you all, but any additional details you want to share on your projects and how that partnership has come about?
Sure, was that question for us?
Yes.
I just cut out for like 1 second. I'd be happy to share. Sorry, if you were going to go ahead.
Okay, yeah, let's both share our project details. So one that we completed in Texas this past year with the TNC chapter there was new for TNC and new for the state of, or new for TNC in the state of Texas, and it was looking at a environmental water transaction with the city and its reservoir, and based on kind of extensive modeling and discussions and negotiation with the city, they're able to establish a process whereby during times of low flow in the Upper Trinity River, one of the tributaries there, which is near Dallas, the TNC will be able to call on excess water that's in that reservoir, and having that water sent downstream will then contribute to the kind of in-stream health for the wildlife and flora there, and that water then continues downstream, supporting sort of all the users that are further downstream. So it's a new model in that this as sort of a transaction with a specific kind of set of steps that happen under certain conditions where, water levels are thus and demand is such and the weather forecast looks like Y, brings into play this set of actions that TNC can take, benefits the downstream populations as well as the natural ecosystem there. So now we're continuing some funding where TNC is working with other partners to sort of share what they've done and how they approached it and were successful with it, so that others can consider it where it's appropriate in other river basins in Texas.
Yeah, I can share real quick. I saw a couple of questions just pop in, but one project that I love because of the innovation and creativity, and a lot of people love to hear about, is because it involves beer. But working with, I see Rebecca Garrett on the call, we funded a number of projects in the Verde Valley in Arizona. Arizona is one of our largest manufacturing sites. That project, they worked, that group there, just amazing. And this is why we love TNC projects so much. The team there developed relationships with farmers, and they wanted to find a crop that used less water, but also maybe used it earlier in the season where it wasn't so hot and so water intensive. So they worked with the farmers to find a crop, and they converted to barley. But to actually have a market for barley, they developed an actual corporation there, a malt house. And I mean, it's just an amazing story of benefiting the environment and the economy. So they created the malt house, and now some of the local brewers buy it. So they've also created this supply chain. And so the barley has a market. And I did a presentation a year or two back with Kim Schoeneck from TNC, and hearing from her, the farmer could like go on vacation in the summer because he did all of his harvesting in the spring. So it used a lot less water, but it also used water in the spring versus the summer. So that project is such a great example of how you can think outside the box to solve both from an economic standpoint, but also for water.
That's great. Byron, any projects that you want to share?
I can. Do you want me to answer that, or do you want to go to another question? Up to you.
I would say if you have a quick project example you want to share, that'd be great. And then we can move to the next question.
Sure. So this one is kind of more inside the fence line, let's say. So one of as part of our waterless program, which is really focused on what we call the finishing process in jeans, which is kind of giving it that beat up, distressed look that we all know and love. There's often a step where you have to add a liquid softener to a bath of water, and you put the jeans in there, and that kind of gives the cotton fibers kind of a soft hand feel to it. And what we found, or not really me, the finishing engineers found, is that you can get the same effect without using any water by throwing the jeans into a laundry machine with golf balls and bottle caps and ceramic pieces, just to kind of beat up the texture, and you get the same effect, and you kind of skip a fabric softener step along the way. It's clever. It's kind of fun.
Yeah. Okay, so I think we have time for one more question, and we'll just see if anyone has a quick answer to this one on trade-offs between consumptive use and discharge quality. Is this something that you all are tackling internally?
I don't quite understand what that question means. I don't know if Sophia could provide more context, or of course, Tina or Byron, if you have an answer, go ahead.
Yeah, so my understanding of this, and Sophia, please add on here, is, you could reduce the amount of water that you're using within your facility, but then that may affect the quality of water going out because you have less volume internally, and it's not diluting the water as much. So how might you address any trade-offs between those issues?
I'm not sure for us that there is a trade-off in that. I mean, just because of, we do on-site water treatment. Of course, any of my other panelists, if you have an answer there.
I think as far as discharge and wastewater quality, that sort of thing for us, that's not our biggest focus area. In beverage, we're typically able to sort of adjust pH a little bit, do a few things on the back end of the plant, but we're not producing highly polluted water or anything out of our operations. And so generally concentrations of things that would be regulated or things like that are not rising to the level of a trade-off with consumptive use for us.
And for us, we basically kind of get at the water quality question through other means, and like that's a whole other topic that we haven't really talked about much today. The factories where we operate, they typically have a wastewater treatment plant on site, or they use a municipal one that's shared. And that treats the wastewater in many ways and brings it to levels that are acceptable for local regulation. And then kind of on the other side of the equation, kind of the prevention side of the equation, we have a very robust chemical management program where we kind of slowly phase out the most hazardous chemicals to ecosystems and human health. So you basically are kind of reducing the input of chemicals in the input and then kind of treating it on the output. That actually, the combination of those two things kind of addresses water pollution dangers much more than worrying about reduced consumptive use, let's say.
Great, thanks for that. And Sophia, thanks for confirming that was what you meant with your question. So hopefully that provides some support for you. And I think we might have time if anyone wants to tackle this question from Rebecca, maybe one person, and we can also just engage directly with Rebecca offline, I think, but elaborating on how you are managing flexibility and navigating different water policies and dynamics between watersheds and states. So that's, again, getting more nuance there on the local nature of water. Any one of you all panelists want to tackle this?
I can try briefly. I think that there is probably tons to talk about offline afterwards. But I think, again, it's sort of like find somebody like TNC who's got chapters that are specialized in different regions and different locations and has folks that understand the policy and has folks that understand the implementation. For us in Mexico, we're actually working with a different group, but a huge emphasis there is kind of finding the right local teams to work with. In California, it's about getting connected to additional groups, but TNC is able to provide those introductions in some cases. I think that that's what helps us be able to operate in all these different locations, is a large organization with chapters that can kind of really address some of those nuances and different needs and different issues in different places.
Thanks, Tina. I think that's all that we have time for today, now that we're getting close to the top of the hour. We will be following up with you all next week with a recording and a short survey that we would appreciate you all filling out. The survey is just going to allow us to present topics that are of most interest to you for future corporate learning series. But in closing, we just want to thank you all for joining us today. As you heard, we've partnered with Intel, Levi Strauss, Keurig Dr. Pepper here, and many other companies to help ensure water for nature, people, and business. So please feel free to reach out to us if you have any additional questions or thoughts, or just want to dig a little bit deeper with our experts. You all make this work happen just as much as we do, and we appreciate your interest and engagement with TNC.